there's blanks in here. You don't have to take all of the notes when we are taking a look at, for example. So for example, on the slide here, you can see there's just a few bold words here. That's the only thing that you'll have to fill in here. So it gives you time to listen, and as I go through pictures, you fill in the pertinent words on the screen, and then you can always take notes in your notebook in addition to, you know, what I'm talking about up here. So that's the way we do notes for the semester. You can, if you want, if we take a look at Canvas, if you prefer to take your notes into a tablet, you could download the notebook for free onto your tablet and then take notes right into your tablet. Some students like to do that. So if you take a look at our Canvas page and you scroll down just a little bit in our Getting Started module, you can see here's a Zarowski Notebook PDF for tablets. There's a PDF and then there's a DocX. So if you prefer to do that, go ahead and download that. I do ask you do not use computers or tablets for anything but note-taking. I will tell you in my experience that students who have their computers out or phones out and are not listening and are doing other stuff on their phones, that they generally are not going to earn an A in the class. And that's anecdotal. What I've seen in my years is that if you have your phone out in front of you and you keep looking at your phone, you're distracted from what I am talking about in class, and you're not fully checked into the class. So do yourselves all a favor, take your phones right now, put them away, not in your pockets, but in a bag. There is evidence that shows that the closer your phone is in proximity to your body, the less learning that you actually do. So even if you just put it in your pocket, it is better to put it in a bag. I do a lot of research on learning, and you might laugh and think it's funny that I'm making up this stuff, but I base all of the information that I give you about learning in research and evidence. So it's also, you know, things I've seen over time. Like I said, students who generally have their computer out or their tablet out or their phone out and they're doing other things during class, they're not earning A's. So if you want to use the PDF, go ahead and load that up. If you, so you have the notebook already. If you don't have the notebook and you're not using a PDF, come on up and grab one of these copies for today. Go grab those, yeah. Yeah. I have on Canvas for you, I have the syllabus. Make sure this week you are working through the Getting Started module here. So on Canvas you have Getting Started. I have a number of items that I would like you to read ASAP. So like the syllabus, for example, read that over carefully. That tells you all of the rules of the course. Your course materials, essentially what you need is you need the lab book. Make sure you have the lab book by next Tuesday. May I borrow that? about maybe $40 in the bookstore, you must have this for the course. This is the main thing, this and the Zarowski notebook, if you're purchasing it from the bookstore, and this. So your textbook is free. It is an open source textbook. You can find the link to your textbook here in Canvas. So course materials again, lab book by next Tuesday, notebook by next Tuesday, free e-text. So let's take a look at, and there's just a few other exercises and assignments you can see here in getting started. These are all due by next Tuesday. Today we will work on this safety lab. I've got other information about great things that are happening on campus. Make sure you give these a read over as well. One is the STEM Club. I know a lot of you are going into competitive fields. It is important for you to be involved in whatever field you're going into, doing shadowing of people in the field, keep track of those things, informational interviews, volunteering, and applicable job work in the field that you're going into. In addition, your colleges and universities moving forward are going to also want to know what kind of clubs did you join in college. You can't just be a 4.0 student and expect to get accepted into a program of your choice. So I highly recommend you join the STEM Club. If you go in here, it'll lead you to how you can join. You can even join virtually. The Professor Deanda, Dr. Deanda, is amazing. It's a really fun club. She has a huge variety of different events. Definitely, I would say, just get in there and join it. That way you get the messages and you can see, like, does something come up, an event come up that you're really interested in. That's really great for you to participate in. So I highly recommend you all join the STEM Club in the least. There's scholarships, and I have other information about great things that are happening on campus. So let's go down to our first unit, the evolution unit. So here, the course revolves around this, the study guide objectives. If we click that open, what you have is you've got a variety of different ways that you can see these study guide objectives. I am going to on the one with the spaces. These study guide objectives are everything you can be tested on for this coming unit. Everything you can be tested on goes right along with my notebook. The textbook is supplemental. So this exactly goes along with my notes, my lectures. And this is what you need to know and understand and study. Study guide objectives are due every Tuesday. So whatever we did the previous week, you need to bring in the following Tuesday. So next Tuesday, we will probably get through that little packet in front of you. You will bring in, and I'll show you ways you can do the study guide, but the notes here, you'll fill these in, and then you will do the study guide. I've got two different options for you. They're the same thing, but just different versions. If you like to do things electronically, like you're someone who really knows how to use your tablet really well, you can do your study guide objectives on there. Stipulations about the study guide objectives: they must be handwritten. You cannot type them. So you can have the portions that I have typed, but the rest of it must be handwritten. So how can you handwrite them? So I've got a couple of options here. One is I've got packets of the study guide where I've got spaces that are left for you to write into. So if you think like, oh yeah, I'd just like to use this as my study guide and fill it out as I go, one of the things that I want to emphasize is the amount of space you have in here should be filled. This is essentially rewriting your notes. So in lecture, if I am talking about the definition of evolution, and the definition of evolution, I have 8 slides surrounding that definition, you should write all of that information. If I speak it in class, it means that this information is important and it revolves around an objective. So if you're going through the objectives and you're writing a couple words, that is not sufficient. The way that I grade the objectives is if they are thoroughly done, meaning that they match pretty well to what I have in my notes, you'll get the full amount of credit. If it's like pretty good, but maybe like you didn't, it said draw an illustration and you did all the writing but you didn't do any of the illustrations, you'll get 80%. If it's kind of half completed, you'll get 50%. If it's really crappy, like a couple words, you'll get like a pity point. And if it's not done at all, every Tuesday you get 0 for that week. So basically, you are rewriting your notes. If it's in the notes, it should be written in the objectives. So I have, again, a couple of options. So one is you can write right into this and you can keep this document and use this as your objectives, your handwriting into there. Otherwise, you can use, I've got the objectives printed here. You can use this to go along with, if I'll have Alexa come on, would you mind coming on?
Okay.
So you all are super duper duper lucky because you have a learning assistant, teaching assistant for the class. This is Alexa. She was in my class last semester. Alexa earned over 100% in the class.
I think so.
Yeah, yeah. So I give you a little bit of extra credit in the class. Alexa earned just about every point in the class. So she is amazing. Alexa is here to help you with your learning. She'll be with us in lecture and in lab. Any questions that you have, you can ask either of us. Alexa has the experience that you are going through. She already knows how to master this class, so feel free to ask her for any tips and everything. And this is Alexa's study guide objectives for the first unit. It's a book. So what Alexa did she had a book for each unit. There were 3 units. She wrote them out by hand. You can see in Alexa's notebook lots of colors. Visual cues help you learn. Color helps you to remember things. So like for example, Alexa would use this to go along with writing in her notebook. So if you want to use a traditional notebook, you can pass the notebook back and forth. You don't have to rip anything out. Alexa would just give me the notebook and then I would give it back to her. And so you don't have to rip things out of a notebook if you choose to write everything into a notebook. Some students, because Alexa was very thorough, she thought, oh, maybe this will be good for the whole year. It wasn't, so she had 3 of them. If you want to use like a 3-ring notebook, you can pass that back and use that notebook for the entire semester. Just pack it back and forth. Please don't rip anything out of a notebook. Keep it all in that notebook. The nice thing about having these books is that a lot of you will go on to take boards in your future, exams, the DAT, the MCAT, there's a million other boards, the GRE, other classes. This is a foundational class that the information in here builds upon. So then you have these in your future that if you're like, oh yeah, that was so great in Professor Zarowski's class, let me go back and let me review that. And you've got these nice little notebooks or your 3-ring notebook or your packets that you can keep with you in the future. So I highly recommend saving those. I've had plenty of students come back from taking board exams and say, oh my gosh, there was so much from Bio 112 on that exam. I am so glad I had my objective notebook. So make sure you save these for your future. Alexa also is so generously offering to do study sessions outside of class as well. I'm telling you, you are so lucky to have Alexa as your learning assistant because she's amazing. And she's going to also have a GroupMe where you can send her messages. So Alexa is really here for you, and I'm really grateful for that.
Thank
you. Want to say anything to that?
Did you get the the poll with the study session times? Did you get?
In GroupMe?
Or wherever you set it up, because there will be a poll with
okay.
all of like my availabilities, and just make sure you do that.
Okay, we'll make sure that's clear too.
Yeah.
So she'll put a poll up that has her availability, and then you can check in like what would work for you, and then she'll make some study sessions around what works for the majority of people. So thank you for that. You all are set and lucky. So After lecture is over, when you're going to lab, I'll remind you that these study guide objectives are up here and you can choose which one you would prefer. And again, they are also digitally here in Canvas as well for you to use at any time. There's a PDF, a DocX, and a DocX. So I've got a variety of different formats for that too. Again, you must handwrite. You cannot type. You cannot type them out. There's a lot of evidence that shows that handwriting helps you to learn things better. It's more kinesthetic, meaning more action-oriented in your learning, and that helps to cement that into your brain. Okay, so those are kind of the basics. What I highly recommend is that after we go through today, what we do in lecture today, go home tonight, tomorrow, sometime before the next class, and you begin working on the objectives we covered in the class today. What you should do always is there's a lot of evidence to show the revisiting of material, going back and reviewing. Our first exam is not until I think week 7, so it's a big exam. Your homework in this class is to study. That is your homework. So that's why Tuesdays, every Tuesday, your objectives will be due. But I can't emphasize enough how important it is that when you write out your objectives, let's say we get through the first 2 pages of this today, that you write these out today or tomorrow, do them nice and thoroughly. And then on Thursday, when you go to add on your new objectives that we cover, you add those in, but then you go back and you review from the beginning. And every time we have a class, add on, then go back and review. And then get yourself in the habit of quizzing yourself, so that once you go back and review, then you start, and perhaps you want to have a blank set of objectives also. That maybe you have this packet, or you have a book, or you have your tablet, and then you just start using something like this, and you start choosing random objectives, and you just write them out and see on your objectives that you have done, did I get that correct? If you didn't get correct, you need to review that again. You need to incorporate quizzing. So the way your studying should look should be write out, review, quiz, add, write out, review, quiz, add, write out, review, quiz, add. And you should be quizzing yourself and studying every week for the exams. All right, anybody, any questions?
Oh, I can't open the PDF on iPad.
Which one? I'm not sure, because they,
This is,
anybody else have any problems opening any of the PDFs?
I don't know, mine says there's an unexpected error. Just try again.
Anybody else open the PDFs and?
I gotta go. So we're doing it on the tablet, how do you want to submit it?
You can, that's a good question, thank you. You can bring your tablet in and just show me.
Okay.
Yeah. You can upload it, but sometimes it takes a long time to upload. But yeah, a lot of times students will just bring me their PDF and then I'll look through it. I mean their tablet, and I'll look through it. Okay, anybody else? If you wanted to do note cards too, I know some students like to do note cards. You could do a note card for each objective. That's up to you too. I would suggest just put them in like a plastic bag to carry them around or rubber band them. So like book, this packet, notebook, note cards, whatever is going to serve you best as a learner, but they must be written by hand. Okay, anybody else, any questions? Okay. All right, so let's do a little lecture. We're going to start this semester with evolution. Oh, and then just a reminder. So homework, writing out your study guide, that's your homework. You have a little bit of homework this week that's unusual because it's the first week. That's just to help you get to know the class and the rules. So again, by next Tuesday, you are bringing in the objectives that we have completed the previous week. On Canvas, you have an introduce yourself discussion, just a few things about you. There's also a private discussion with me, a private assignment, your name. If people mispronounce your name, I would prefer you to have a phonetic pronunciation. People mispronounce my name all the time. So the way that I always write my name phonetically is my name is Zur Ow Ski. Zur Ow Ski. The ow, the AW is ow, it rhymes with wow. So that you can see, like if I just put OW, someone might be like, what do you mean by that? And I put specifically that part of my name rhymes with wow. Okay, so that's what I mean phonetically, is tell me if someone mispronounces your name often, explain to me phonetically how to pronounce it. I believe it's important for people to pronounce your name correctly. It's part of your identity. If you have pronoun preferences, and then if you have any accommodations from the Center for Disability Services, please let me know so I can make sure that whatever you need, I can support that. There's a syllabus quiz. Make sure you read over the syllabus. I've chunked out the syllabus into the Getting Started module also, so I would suggest read over the syllabus, go through the Getting Started module, then take the syllabus quiz. And then you are going to make a learning log plan for success graphic organizer for this class. This is handwritten. You are going to make a plan for success. There is a lot of psychological evidence that shows that if you write out a plan to accomplish a goal, you are more likely to accomplish that goal. So you are going to make out your plan for success in this class. I've given you all kinds of tips for success as well. Okay, anyone, any questions? Okay, so let's start out with evolution. A number of just kind of like overviews about evolution. What we focus in on this class is we focus mostly on the theory portion of evolution. There's two parts to evolution. There is a theory part of evolution. That means that there's a lot of evidence by a lot of scientists, and they all come to the same conclusions about this evidence. This is information that is widely accepted by the scientific community. There is a hypothesis portion of evolution. The hypothesis portion of evolution is about how life started. Nobody was there. We don't have evidence. Nobody knows how life has started. So a lot of times I know that people will have problems where they say, I don't believe in evolution because I think blah, blah, blah created life. And I'll say, you can have that. That's great. Because science can't say otherwise. There are simulations that show this may have been how life had started, but those are just simulations, meaning they're examples. This is something that may have happened, but you might have other ideas, and that's cool. And so we are going to focus on the theory portion, the evidence that shows that as evolution goes, that living things go from simple to complex over time, that living things adapt or change over long periods of time. And so I'm going to present to you some ideas of how we got there. So let's talk a little bit about the influence of water on life. If we go back, early ideas about evolution. Now, when we're talking about evolution ideas, one of the things that I think is really great now in terms of globalization and the sharing of information globally is that we see that almost every culture around the globe, as they developed, they philosophized about how did life start? How did different organisms become different? And so a lot of different cultures have ideas that are here. And so one of the earliest concepts was that living things developed in water. We do have evidence that the earth was covered in water over 4 billion years ago. So that idea is well supported by data. If we look at kind of a timeline of like, when we're looking at these kind of early portions of water and early portions of living things and the earth, this is all happening in water. And then eventually we have kind of like the earth, water recedes, and we get about like 75% water and 25% land and what we have today. So living things are in water, and then we do get some living things make their way onto land, but some living things stay in water. And so water, if you took like Bio 111, for example, you know water is critical to making and breaking biomolecules, and water is critical. We kind of just like a general knowledge, right, know that water is critical to life. Because if you get dehydrated as an organism, you cannot make and break your biomolecules, which means you cannot survive. And so water is just, we have lots and lots and lots and lots of data from chemistry, from biology that says water is critical to life and that life began in water. We also find that as we go from these early life forms, that they were very, very simple. They were prokaryotic. They were cells that do not have a nucleus. And then eventually we'll get into kind of a history of life and see what happened, then what happened, then what happened, then what happened to get to complex organisms like us. But also some organisms stayed simple, right? We have lots, especially now this time of year, we have lots of different diseases going around. We know that some organisms have not changed over time. We also know that some particles are around that never even became organisms, like the viruses that are going around. So we do know that while simple life forms preceded complex ones, some organisms remained simple over evolutionary time, and some did build from that simplicity into complexity. Okay, so some ideas about evolution. Some people proposed that organisms on the earth were put on the earth in a certain form, and they did not change. And that's called fixed species, but we know that's not true. Organisms have changed over time, and we'll talk about that evidence too. Also, there was what is called a proposed ladder of nature, that living things were put on the earth in a hierarchy of forms. More perfect ones were at the top and less perfect ones were at the bottom. Let's see where humans, oh, look at that. Humans made this ridiculous ladder of nature and they put humans at the top. Let's see where some other things are. So like plants, for example, right? Plants, do we not rely on plants for our oxygen to metabolize our food and for our food? I think if I were going to make a ladder of nature, I would put them way above humans because we can't survive without plants, but they put plants way, way, way down there, right next to inanimate matter. That seems ridiculous. We also don't even have microorganisms on there. We have trillions of microorganisms that live in and on us and help us to survive every day. So there is a lot of flaws here. So this fixed species and the ladder of nature, not true. Okay, then we get into the 1700s, and I'm sure people were studying fossils way before the 1700s, but we start to get the documentation of fossils, and we see that the ancient remnants, the bones, the imprints, the life history of an organism left behind tells us a bit about what an organism was like. And we can see things like a remnant of an ancient ancestor. This big organism is called the Glyptodont. It is a relative of the modern day armadillo. Now, evolution takes a really, really long time to happen. So, what came before the Glyptodont? I don't know. But at least these two, we have their fossil, the bone records. We have this Glyptodont here, and doing what will also modern forms of studying of evolution like DNA shows that these two are related and do have a common ancestor. One thing to notice is that even though simple gives rise to complex, that does not necessarily mean that small gives rise to big. Sometimes over evolutionary time, you have species who are small, the environment changes, it is favored to be bigger, environment changes, it is favored for it to be smaller. We can see here. So if we're thinking about the time that this Glyptodont was alive, I would hypothesize, I actually have support for this hypothesis, that the food sources, the plants were really, really big at that time, which would make sense that that is a really big organism. So the environment shapes the form that an organism takes. We'll get to more about natural selection soon enough. So in the studying of fossils, we know that organisms change over time. The other thing that people began to figure out was that they thought the Earth was like 2,000 years old. And then eventually they found, no, you know what? Based on these fossil records, I think the Earth has to be at least 6,000 years old. What we know today by studying fossils, by studying different layers of sediment in the ground, we know that the Earth is about 4.6 billion years old. So it's kind of interesting that early on when different cultures began philosophizing and saying, based on these fossils, I don't think it's 2,000, I think it's like 6,000. People were like, oh my gosh, that's ridiculous, right? Now go from 2,000 to 4.6 billion.
So are we saying like we're studying how some like fish turn into land animals?
How they have a common ancestor with land animals.
So
Yes,
like-
we will see that.
Okay.
Yeah,
So like how some fish grow teeth and then like over thousands of years.
yes, correct. Yes, very good, thank you. Okay, another proposed idea about evolution was the inheritance of acquired characteristics. Some cultures believed that you could acquire a trait, meaning like I could dye my hair blue, I can acquire the blue hair color from my environment, and that if I were pregnant while I had blue hair, that my offspring would also have blue hair. Could that be true? Could I put in blue contacts and dye my hair blue, and then my offspring will be blue hair, blue-eyed? No, right? Because eventually we find out that characteristics are based in genetics, and that you can't just choose to do things to your physical self and then expect your offspring to also inherit those traits. So we know that this idea of inheritance of acquired characteristics is not true either. All right, but then we get to these big ideas circulating the globe called adaptation. And adaptation means that organisms have traits that allow them to survive easily in their environment, and they thrive, and they have offspring who also have those beneficial traits. If you are an organism who your traits are not well adapted, they don't match up with the environment very well, you are going to have a difficult time surviving. If you are having a difficult time surviving, is it a good idea to reproduce? No, right? And so traits that are not favored in the current environment, those individuals struggle to survive, therefore they struggle to have offspring, and that trait starts to go down in percentage over time. But the traits that are favored in the environment, that are naturally selected for, go up in percentage over time. And that is how adaptation and natural selection occur. It's nothing magical. It's just that, do you have traits that help you survive easily? Yes, then you probably have the time and energy to reproduce, and your offspring will have those beneficial traits. Do I not have good traits that allow me to survive? Nope. Then I probably am just struggling to survive. I am not going to reproduce, or maybe I just have one offspring instead of 10, and that trait goes down in percentage over time. That is how evolution occurs over time. So this idea of adaptation, do I have the traits that allow me to survive easily? I am well adapted. Do I not have the traits that allow me to survive easily? I am not well adapted. That's what adaptation means. Adaptation is not like what you and I might think, that I can change my behaviors and do better. When we're talking about evolutionary adaptation, it means that these things are characteristics already based in our genetics. We have what we have, and the environment does what it does. Do we match up? We survive easily. Do we not match up? We do not. Okay, so those are key ideas about evolution. Early on, one of the first people that we have a lot of evidence of writing down these ideas about evolution is Charles Darwin. This, we will see a lot more different cultures in our lifetimes be added to Darwin's ideas because of globalization. People are acknowledging cultures other than the white male. So, a lot of times in textbooks we see these ideas like Darwin discovered evolution. No, he didn't. But because he was a white male, his information circulated a lot more than people of other cultures. But all cultures were coming up with these ideas. So he's kind of like a temporary placeholder for now. So ideas that Charles Darwin and other cultures had, we will talk about. So a little background about Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin grew up in England, and his family was very wealthy. They were of a higher class. His father was a doctor, and Charles was very smart, and his father said, "Charles, you will become a doctor too." And Charles was like, "Oh no, I hate blood. Oh, I see blood and I just pass out. Makes me sick." And his dad's like, "I don't care." I'm sure some of you are going through this now, right? Your parents are like, "You will be this." Okay, so Charles, he was just like, "Okay, Dad, I'll try." And he got into surgical rooms and kept passing out. Like, clearly you cannot be a surgeon if you cannot stay awake during surgeries. So finally, the father was like, "Okay, I guess this isn't going to work for you." But Charles really liked studying the natural world. He loved animals. He liked looking at differences. He liked drawing those differences and documenting them. At this time, in the early 1800s, these global voyages were going on around the world. And there was this issue in a lot of the cultures who had these big ships where there was classism, where if you were of a higher class, you were better than everyone else, and you did not have to talk to people of lower classes. And Charles Darwin was of a higher class. And what happened with these voyages is that the captain was of a higher class than the rest of the crew. So the captain had this attitude of like, "I'm going to go on this voyage and lead it, but I do not have to talk to my crew because I am better than them." And one of the things about humans is that we actually need human connection. And these captains not talking to their crews made them go crazy. And so to kind of alleviate this insanity that would develop because they thought they were too good to talk to the rest of their crew, that they would add these naturalists onto these voyages. Charles Darwin got to go on the HMS Beagle in 1831, and he was a social companion to the captain, and he also took a lot of notes, just like Alexa's little notebook. He had a lot of little notebooks that he would, as he went everywhere, he would take notes and he would draw and he would collect fossils as he went. Okay, so some things that Charles noticed when he went on his voyage. One is that living things were precisely adapted to their environment, meaning that how they look and acted often matched up with what the environment was doing. For example, in Europe, there were hares, which were kind of big bunny rabbits, and in England it was a little bit chillier all year long. It was rainy and gray, and so the hares, the rabbits, these big rabbits, they had really thick fur coats to stay warm. They had thick layers of fat, and they had really short ears because any external things like fingers, nose, ears, toes, when it's cold outside, those are the first things to get damaged if they are exposed. So having short ears in cold weather matches up with the environment. Having a thick coat of fur in a cold environment, lots of fat, all helps you to stay warm in a cold environment. But when Darwin goes down into other warmer areas like here, what he noticed, he was like, there's these rabbits and they're really skinny and they have really thin fur and they have really big ears. And he was like, it's warmer here, so it makes sense that they're very similar, the hare and the rabbit, but down here, they're thin. They don't need that thick amount of fat to stay warm. They actually are warm, so they can be thinner. And their hair is really thin because it's hot, right? You don't want to put on a fur coat where it's hot. And then he had these big ears, which could radiate heat off of the body when you're hot. And he was like, they look similar, but they match the environment precisely. And he started to come up with this idea about adaptation, that organisms, while they could look similar in different areas, they are precisely adapted. They have traits or characteristics that match up with the environment to help them survive better. And so that is a big idea about evolution that people just thought, again, at the time, they thought fixed species, you just boop, you're put on the earth in a certain form and you never change. And he was like, they've got to be related somehow. And we'll get to biogeography, like when all organisms were part of one landmass, and as those land masses moved into different climates, the traits or characteristics that were favored changed too over time. He also, in looking at fossils, was like, these things are clearly like the glyptodont and the armadillo. He's like, there's no way that something could change forms in such a short amount of time. And based on looking at different fossils, he was like, the Earth's got to be a lot older than we said it was. And a lot of other cultures are coming to this idea too. So here's another example. The modern day beaver has a head about this big. And if we go back millions of years, there was a giant beaver whose head was about 4 times bigger, which means it was about 4 times larger in size, which gives you an idea that it was probably a much colder climate, the food was probably a lot bigger in size. Okay, so now when Darwin goes on his voyage, one of the places that had a really significant effect was right here, the Galapagos Islands. It's a chain of volcanic islands. They're very young. They're much younger than the mainland of South America. And he saw all kinds of animals there that were really, really unique in comparison to other animals around the globe. So we'll get to his finches, which are very famous, but there's other species that Darwin noticed the differences between. So he noticed that when he was on the land areas, that there were these green iguanas, and they were brightly colored green. They were very slim. They were good at climbing trees, and they ate a lot of fruits and vegetables and some insects. And that their head was smaller in size, but they had this giant throat pouch where they could carry food in when they were on land. But then at the shorelines where the ocean met the land, he saw these marine iguanas, and these marine iguanas were really stout. They were really muscular. They were really good at swimming. Their food that they ate was algae in the ocean. And at the shoreline, it's very tumultuous. So they had to be really good swimmers. So much more muscular bodies here, much better at fighting something that is tough, like ocean waves. He also noticed that the head was much larger in size, and that the head had these spikes on top. And observing these marine iguanas, what he noticed is that they would dive into the ocean, and the algae that grew on rocks, they would use those spikes on their head to scrape the algae off the rocks. And the algae would then float, and they would grab up the algae. Now, any of you get up and drink a big glass of salt water this morning? I mean, maybe if you're sick, you might gargle, but you spit it out, right? We don't drink salt water. We know salt water, that salt has a property of dehydration, and that we have to get copious amounts of salt out of our body. That is important in little tiny amounts, but too much salt is really, really bad for us. And so they have this challenge here, the marine iguanas, is that the food they're eating, they're getting salt water with their food, and they try and spit out as much of the water as possible, but their food is coated in salt too. And so inside of their head, one of the reasons why their head is so big is they've got these giant mucus glands. So I've been sick, I was sick last week. I know that the glands in my head are producing lots and lots of mucus to get the virus particles out of my head, right? So we know mucus helps to grab onto stuff and get it out of our body. That's what they have in their head, tons of mucus glands. So that when they take in salt with their food, the mucus grabs onto the salt, and then they do this. They have a behavior along with those mucus glands that helps them to not get super dehydrated even though their food is covered in salt. The green iguanas do not do this behavior. So they are essentially sneezing tons of mucus out of their heads. Lots of mucus produced to grab onto the salt, and sneezing to get that salt with the mucus out of their bodies. So when they are on land, they are in this constant state of sneezing. You do not see that behavior with the green iguanas. The green iguanas don't need to do that because their food source is not covered in salt. So Darwin noticed, okay, their environment of their food makes for a very different form that is needed, a different adaptation based on what they need to do to survive in their environment. And as Darwin went to all these different islands in the Galapagos, he noticed that plants were precisely adapted to their environment, and birds, and reptiles, and anything else that he saw, fungus, all kinds of creatures, organisms were precisely adapted to living on that particular island of the Galapagos. And he was like, aha, they match up. Survival and adaptation and characteristics all go together. So his finches, what Darwin noticed was that there were birds on the mainland that looked kind of like that. And then there were birds on different islands. And all the birds, one of the things that he saw a distinct difference in was the shape of their beaks. And depending on the food available on the island, the beak shape was well suited to that kind of food. Now the bodies of the birds looked very similar. And there were a lot of things that looked very similar, but the beak shapes were very different. So, for example, here, if he looked at 4 different islands, and on this island there were large seeds, what he noticed about the finches on that island was they had really big, thick beaks for crushing through those big seeds. And on islands that had a certain kind of cactus plant, that they had very pointy beaks so they could pick between the spines of the cactus and still get some of the food that is available on the cactus without getting stuck by the spines. And if you had, on one island, you had all kinds of insects, that they had a long skinny beak for picking the insects up. And on an island, if they had plants that were really thick-leaved, that they had these serrated or kind of like a zigzag-shaped edge to their beak for tearing those thick leaves. And Darwin then noticed that they all are specifically adapted to what's going on their island. They are similar to the birds on the mainland, but depending on their environment, their traits matched up precisely to allow them to survive on that particular island. So he saw the similarities, but yet noticed the fine differences in regard to survival. So this was a big idea because everybody just thought, again, poof, you're just put on the earth in this form and that's it. So Darwin began to wonder not only about the finches, but he began to wonder about everything. Is this true for all living things? And these were ideas that were new in the world. He knew these ideas would challenge what people thought. And when he came back from his voyage and he presented these ideas, you know how like you figure something out and you're so excited and you're like, oh my gosh, I figured this out. And you go to somebody like a friend or a family member, a mentor, and you're like, I figured this thing out. It's so cool. And they're like, it's dumb. Or they look at you like you're crazy. And you're so excited because you're like, I know this is a great thing. That's what happened to Darwin. He comes back from his voyage and he's like, oh my gosh, I figured out adaptation, and I figured out the earth was older than I thought, and I figured out that all organisms are probably related, and everybody was like, you're crazy. And they shunned him as a society. And Darwin was just kind of like, his career was pretty much over. He went back into the lab, went into the basement with all his fossils and his drawings, and he wrote papers, and he submitted them to various scientific organizations, and they were like, yeah, we're not printing this. This is weird. But then, just a little while longer, someone else started publishing these ideas like 10, 16 years old later. I think it was about 16 years later. This guy, Alfred Wallace, started publishing the same exact ideas, but a little more than a decade later. And people were like, oh, that's really interesting, Alfred Wallace. Wow, that's really smart. And Darwin was like, I said this years ago. And Darwin was like, all right, I guess I'll just like go along with Wallace now and forget that everybody called me crazy. And Darwin got together with Wallace and they went to a conference where they presented their ideas together. Remember that they both came up with these ideas independently. Wallace did not know about Darwin. Darwin did not know about Wallace until a certain point. But it's kind of cool because they came to the same ideas on their own, so that when Darwin started reading about what Wallace was publishing, he was like, yeah, that backs me up, yeah. Okay, so they came up with these ideas. Wallace also traveled extensively around the globe. Also, remember that other cultures were attending these conferences and going like, yeah, we have those ideas too. I had those ideas. And so a lot of scientists around the world were starting to get backed up by each other and the evidence that they all accumulated on these voyages in their areas where they lived. They noticed that species differed a little bit, but that depended on where they lived. They noticed the environment had an influence on what was favored and what was not favored. And in 1858, Wallace and Darwin presented this big idea that species change over time. And finally, because so many people globally were talking about these ideas, and so many people had fossils, observations, published papers, that in science in the mid-1850s, people were ready to agree the Earth was a lot older than they originally thought, that adaptation is an actual thing, and that species, while they don't change quickly over time, over long periods of time, when the environment changes, the traits, the adaptations that are favored change, and the fluctuation and characteristics changes in a species over time, making that species over time change. So let's talk about this idea of natural selection. From this conference in 1858, the idea of natural selection was proposed. Look at the words, natural selection. Nature selects for organisms who have the traits, they just happen to have the genetics and the traits that match up with the environment and allow them to survive better. So what we mean by nature selects for, it means that you just match up. The nature's not like you, I like you, I'm going to let you survive. No. You have what you have genetically, and if what you have genetically matches up with the environment right now, you are selected for. It doesn't really mean you're chosen. It means that you match. And because your genetic traits match up with the environment, we call that natural selection. You are well adapted. And that's what we mean by nature selects for, or natural selection. That those with advantageous traits, by chance, you just by chance have what you have. Do you get to choose what you have genetically? Can I be like, I'm going to order up wings and gills? Can I order that up? No, right? Okay, so genetically you have what you have. Every species has what they have. Some species, environment changes suddenly, and now what they have doesn't match up well and they go extinct. Extinction is a natural part of evolution. Sometimes the environment changes and all of a sudden you're doing good and now you're not. And you could go extinct. Sometimes the environment changes and you were struggling and now all of a sudden the environment changes and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so much easier. This is great, right? So sometimes natural selection works in a struggling individual or species' favor, and sometimes it goes the opposite way and it doesn't. So again, remember, the finches, those with beaks that matched up with the food did well. If your beak matched up with the food on your island, you have an easier time surviving. When you have an easier time surviving, you have time. You're not struggling to go get food. You just go like, boop, 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 I eat, I can relax. Ooh, look at that male or that female. They have nice traits too. I think I will reproduce with them. I have time to take care of offspring. So that when your adaptations are good, match up, advantageous in the environment, you do not struggle. You have time to reproduce, time to take care of offspring. And then those with advantageous traits, the percentage goes up. If your traits do not match well in the environment, and you are spending all day trying to get food, you are not going to try and reproduce. So that trait goes down in percentage over time. That's the way evolution works. Okay, so natural selection. One thing I want you to remember, especially for those of you who are going to continue taking more biology classes, do not ever, 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 ever use the word strong and weak. If you use those terms in especially this unit, whatever essay, whatever portion, I'm just crossing it off and being like, nope, you didn't listen. These terms, people hate to hear strong and weak. Sometimes being strong and big does not suit you based on the environment. Sometimes being weak might actually be the advantage. So you always want to use the terms favorable, adapted, well-suited, advantageous, or the opposite of those terms. But again, do not use strong or weak. I've had students come back and say, I know you told me to do that, or not do that, and I wrote this in my essay and my professor gave me an F. And I'm like, right, because in evolution, these terms are despised. So do yourself a favor, remember, don't use strong and weak. Advantageous, favorable, non-advantageous, unfavorable, use those. Oh, okay. So I like to pepper in questions that are similar to questions that will be on your exams. Your exams are multiple choice exams. I like to teach you how to approach multiple choice questions. So let's take a look at this question. The existence of species of flightless birds with wings. So again, birds that have wings but they don't fly. What does it suggest? Does it suggest they are not related to flying birds? Why would they have wings otherwise? They've got to be related somehow. They are descended from flying birds, but have adapted to their particular environment.
Yeah.
That sounds nice, right? Oh, there's a penguin. Their wing, what do they use the wing for? Not flying, but for swimming. And aren't they good swimmers with their wings? Yeah, so here we have, they've adapted the use of their wings for swimming. Kind of like a fin in a fish. Totally different organisms, but have similar traits that are well adapted and are favorable in their environment. So yes, that sounds good. They are more related to bats than flying birds. Can you get that out of this information? They are closely related to fish, but are evolving to become flying birds. Goofy. They were created in a lab. Okay, so, good. The best answer here is they're descended from flying birds, but have adapted to their particular environment. Okay. All right, so Darwin and Wallace, when they got together, they were like, let's make some 3 big principles about evolution and natural selection. So here's what they came up with together. Traits are passed on from parent to offspring. Right? I can't just be like, I would like to have gills and wings. I can't do that. Okay? I get whatever my parent is, I know what they have genetically, I'm going to get very similar traits as well. Inheritance is based in DNA, genetics. It's not magic. If the traits are favorable, that's why you're there. Because your parents had favorable traits and were able to reproduce and have you. Okay, so that's number 1. Okay, principle 2. More offspring are often produced than survive. Not everybody who is born has favorable traits. Sometimes a lot of offspring are born and the environment changes, and then a bunch of them with certain traits die because they don't match up well anymore. So just because you are born does not mean you are going to survive to adulthood. You guys see what's happening with the environment. We'll see cases where there are species that have 2 offspring, and because the environment that they're in, they protect one and they let the other one die. Because they're like, I only have the resources to really safely raise 1 offspring, so out of the 2, whichever one has the better traits from me and biological dad, I'm going to really put all my energy into them, and the other one I'm going to just be like, literally, there are species where they have 2 offspring, they look at which one is more suited to the environment based on the genetics they and biological dad give, and the one who is better suited, they protect, and they literally turn their back on the other one and just let them die. The way it goes sometimes. Survival and reproduction are not always determined by chance, right? If you have advantageous traits, you match up. If you don't, you struggle to survive and struggle to reproduce. And the third postulate or principle is there is variation amongst members of a population. Variation is based in our genetics. The more variation in a population, often the better. Because if the environment changes suddenly and you have a lot of variance in your population, hopefully a portion of your population can survive that change and keep your population evolving or going. If everybody's exactly the same and the environment changes, and now, because we're exactly the same, none of us are favored, we go extinct. So variation is a really good thing. This is the same species of snail. just like you and I in this room, right? We could tell the differences between each of us individually, just like you could tell the differences between each of these snails individually based on their colors, their patterns. And variation is a good thing. Because if the environment changes, hopefully a select few of us we have advantageous traits to survive that change. All right, so what's evolution? Evolution, we are going to look at right now, we are going to look at the theory portion of evolution. When we are talking about a theory, the theory of evolution, simple to complex, living things evolve over time. There is common ancestry amongst individuals. We'll get into more of that as we go. Evolution is based in genetics. Species change over time. What we will take a look at the rest of this information in this chapter is we are going to look at the data from a lot of scientists to show that living things change over time. Nature selects for certain organisms based on their traits, and that living things have a common ancestry. And so what we are looking at is we are looking at the theory portion of evolution. The data and information that supports living things change over time. Living things have a common ancestor. Given the current technology, a theory is something that cannot be disproved as of right now. So all of this information is backed up by science. Again, we are not talking about how life started. That is not the theory portion of evolution. That is hypothetical. So we are focusing on the theory portion of evolution. There is all kinds of information that supports the theory of evolution. We will look at fossils, skulls, limbs, embryology, biogeography, and molecular biology, and show this support. So in lab today, what you are going to do is, number one, you're going to do the safety lab. So what I usually like to do, because I know we're in here until 10:45, and then we have a transition to our lab room. Our lab room is on the other side of the building, straight across. So what I would like to do is in the next 5, so don't pack up yet, please, just please listen. That when I get done speaking, pack up, go and drop your stuff in the lab room. If you need to get some water or use the restroom, take a quick break. And then I will do a pre-lab. This is what we're doing in lab. This is where you find the stuff. This is information you need. And then after I do the pre-lab, if you need to take a longer break, like you want to get a coffee and stand in line, then I would ask you to do that. So if we can kind of like do a somewhat quick transition into the lab room, drop your stuff, do an overview of lab, and then that opens up time for you to take like a little bit more of a break. Just because I know a lot of students like to get moving.